So here we now have our dear beloved brother Nabeel Al-Azami. In the few moments that we have with him today,
Thank you.
it's only by the mercy of Allah, his resilience, his courage, your du'as, the du'as of his parents, the du'as of everyone that he has benefited, that he is here sitting amongst you all today. Yesterday I visited him, and after 40 minutes I had to leave because he wasn't in a state to receive anybody. So the fact that he's lasted so long today is only a reflection of that mercy and blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon Nabeel. So what we'll do now, as I mentioned, we'll just have a quick conversation with Nabeel. Nabeel, as I told you, you don't have to do anything. There's no presentation, there's no notes, there's no minutes. The very fact that you're here is enough for everybody. Many people here are not here, they're here to see you, to congratulate you, to share some moments with you. So that's how we want it. So I don't want any. This is not a Murabi training program.
No,
this is not executive leadership program. You're not pitching to anybody.
You're running a good program yourself, I think.
We're all bought in. We've all bought in. That's why we're here. So inshallah. Now, how are you feeling?
Alhamdulillah, I'm feeling well. Can I just begin with a couple of quick points?
Go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. It means a lot that you've given up time in Ramadan to be here. So can I first of all thank you, and you should give yourself a round of applause, honestly, for being here. Secondly, I'm thoroughly embarrassed by the amount of Nabeel this, Nabeel that. I really didn't want this. And really it's about the ideas and some of what we need to try and contribute in the world that we're facing, which I hope we'll talk about ideas today. I hope we'll whittle through. There was a lot of Murabi this, Murabi that. I don't want to go into that at all, but I couldn't control that. And really what I want to talk about is what are we going to do about the ethical leadership crisis we're facing today. And very quickly I want to get to the point that was made by my dear sister, Dr. Zaza, who I call Zaza Appa, about ibtila, tribulation. And when you face a tribulation and challenge, it's been mentioned about my health challenges, which I'll share one or two points about. How do you respond to that? What is the Islamic way to respond to that? What is the prophetic inspired way to respond to that? And when you embrace it in the correct way, Allah opens up doors and gives you the opportunity to contribute a lot more. So I wanted to mention that. Again, I also wanted to mention that my doctors have forbidden me from fasting, so I do apologize that I might have to take a little bit of water. Is that okay with you? Because of my condition, there's some key medication.
Even if the doctors didn't advise you, we'd force you to drink here.
This is the Islamic advice.
So no justification.
So afwan for that as well. So other than that, I did want to share some reflection and thoughts around Ibtila at some point, but
sure, no problem. In the presentation that you sent me, Taneem, I think, is Taneem gone now?
I'm not sure.
Taneem.
And while Taneem comes, can I also really thank Sheikh Hassan? He's been a long-running spiritual guide, teacher to me. And honestly, today, and just the book itself, the issue was that the author is coming, the book's not there now. The book arrived where the author was really the issue. And yesterday, my health wasn't in a great shape, and somehow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, the means for me to be here. But also, I think this wouldn't have happened without the hard work and of my teacher, Sheikh Hassan. So a round of applause for Sheikh Hassan. Honestly, he's unbelievable. And my apologies, because there's so many teachers here, so many friends here, so many people who've actually shaped my life. You guys have shaped who I am today, and there isn't the time to hear from everybody, and maybe in future events, there'll be an opportunity.
We've heard from 22 people.
I know.
This
22 amazing people who are here.
This is more than an international conference here,
I know,
right?
Subhanallah.
In the presentation that you shared, there was one of the first slides was a slide with a dear, respected, beloved teacher of ours. Could you explain who this is and why you wanted to put that in the slide?
I put that in the slide because it's not common that somebody has been in a field and a subject matter for more than 20 years. So yes, the book's been a long time coming, but it's also, as my dear wife mentioned, a labor of love. I spent a long time thinking about leadership, and the genesis is in my childhood. Is there a copy of the book? I worked hard to write it. Yeah, I want to just. So Ustad Khurram Murad.
By the way, can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
Look, I mean, I see many of you who have been in publishing. I see Sarah at the back over there. There was absolutely, where we were running against like logic, trying to get this book out. Now I feel your pain of running a magazine. We've never run a magazine, but this was as though I could feel the pain that you used to go through, and every single month you went through that. May Allah bless you and elevate you, Sarah. So on Wednesday, I arrived back from Turkey. On Thursday, last Thursday, I went to Nabeel's house. I had 5 copies directly from the printers. I went to the printers, went to the airport, came to Nabeel's house. But with Nabeel, I told him, Nabeel, you left the manuscript so late, so much work was needed. Now, I'm not quite sure whether we'll have anything on Saturday for the launch. What do we do? Crisis management time. Nabeel sort of absorbed that bad news, perceived bad news, and said, oh, what are our options? So I said, perhaps we can photocopy a chapter, bind it, and give it out to everyone. Wali Bhai suggested, perhaps we can have a PDF of the book and just flick through it and let people... And then Nabeel pulled out his laptop, said, no, don't worry. I've got a whole full presentation. I can probably fill in the 2 hours. He was ready. Even in that scenario, when we came with the news, I didn't prolong it, but then I asked my brother to bring in the books, and he couldn't quite fathom what exactly was happening.
It was an absolute gift.
Go ahead, yeah.
Unbelievable. I thought they came to tell me off because I dragged them out because what it is, this book, in the last 10 years of i'tikaf, each i'tikaf, the first day I picked up from the last day of last year's i'tikaf. Because outside, there's just no time. But in i'tikaf, you're afforded the time and space and peace to write. So this book saw Laylatul Qadr, in the last 4 years that I worked between 2014 and 18. And hence, it's symbolic that, in the 27th night that I received this, that I started doing a few sort of sign-offs through to this morning, which is, 27th morning. That symbolism of Laylatul Qadr is captured in this book. This book, it's got that blessing, if you like. And I just want to mention a couple of quick things as we begin. Khurram Murad, childhood. I absorbed, and I thought that he was talking to me because in my childhood, the Prophet was described as kana khuluquhu al-Quran. He was the embodiment of Quran, and my father rightly emphasized the importance of Quran. And through that, I could see not only the what that the Quran offered, but the how in the Prophet and the manner in which the Prophet exhibited leadership. And I was also, conscious of my parents, both my parents and my grandparents who were community leaders. Many of the leaders. From institutions like here, MCB, Islamic Foundation, count my parents as their teachers in the 80s and 90s. So I was very much surrounded by knowing about leadership. So that's a bit about my childhood. But I just want to make a quick point before your next question, which is the dedication of this book matters quite a lot because it starts by saying to Ammo, which is my late mother, to Dada, my grandfather, many of you will know, who was a well-known leader in Bangladesh within the Islamic parties. My Nana, my maternal grandfather, who I was one of the few who got to see because I'm the eldest, whose love and inspiration carries me through. So these people formed and shaped me, but then also to Amma. So who is Amma? Amma is basically my mother-in-law when I married 14 years ago, who treated me like her own son. That's Nasreen's mother. So I want to honor her as well. And what was amazing is that, as my father said, that we buried a brother, sixth son, who my mother was very upset about, Samir. And my son, Samir, who's been running around here, is a tribute to both our mothers because it's the name of my brother who's buried in Jeddah. But you remember your sister came at the birth when he was born and was stunned because he looked like your mother. So in that way, I've honored a lot of people here. And I want to share this because my Boro Khala, many of you, my maternal Khala, her husband died in December. Just December gone. He was given 6 months of a life-threatening condition. That was 24 years. So in that sense, you have to believe and be optimistic. Allah is the one who makes the final verdict as well. And similarly, my Chorokala as well. Recently, there was a horrific accident last summer in Bangladesh where no one should have survived in that car, but somehow most of them did. My cousin's sister's flown all the way here as well after she heard, but Samia passed away there. So a lot of dedication here of people who are no longer with us, who I'd like you to remember as well. So they all shaped my life, and many of you have as well. So I just want to throw that in, if that's okay.
The floor is yours. Here we have a quote here by Professor John Adair that the world needs this book. He's considered to be the world's first leadership professor.
Yes.
So what's the story with John? Taneem, are you still here? I need John and Nabeel. What's the story with? I heard Steve earlier. Was it Steve or it was Steve? Steve mentioned that John calls him Ibn Swaylam.
Yes, indeed.
What's Ibn Swaylam?
Well, actually, you got the message before he gave you the. He didn't give you the forward, did he? Not, well, perhaps you need to read the forward. I don't know if you've got it. Okay.
No, I've read it. It's for the it's for
Indeed.
So what's Ibn Swaylam? What's your relationship with John? Who is John?
John Adair is an exception because if you study leadership and management, you will have to come across John Adair. John wrote more than 50 books on leadership. Now, the problem you find with Western business professors and leaders is they have this post-industrialization mindset, a secular mindset that all knowledge, including human knowledge, including their own, Greco-Roman history, is irrelevant. Everything useful is now. So prior to, and this, is ridiculous because we know famous quote by Martin Luther King that our scientific and technological power have outstripped our human power. Hence, we have guided missiles and misguided men. And this is something he said so long ago, and today rings very true. Why are we having misguided men? What is the ethical training behind the human beings who are creating technology and artificial intelligence, for example? Who are the people behind AI, and what are their ethical limits? So there are some really big questions we have to confront in a serious way. Now, John is an exception. He values knowledge from history, whereas the sort of Western secular the business discourse, they're bereft of history. So what was interesting is that I started submitting assignments after assignments. They wanted me to compare Britain with the rest of Europe, looking at skills, personal development. I was giving them Imam Ghazali and personal development stuff, and they were like, what's all this about? They were getting all manner of assignments until it got to the stage where in my dissertation I could go a lot deeper. And my dissertation was around looking at I called it neglected sources of management principles from Islamic civilization. It's a bit mouthful, but I was looking at leadership, I was looking at a range of areas, and they said, we don't have a supervisor qualified to do your... I said, well, then my dissertation's proved, because you've just proved you're bereft of history. Thank you very much, stamp. So, it's very interesting when you engage in that space. We're working closely with Transparency International, where they're also trying to expose issues of unethical leadership and behavior. And within one of the book launches of my good friend Lawrence Cockcroft, who's the co-founder of Transparency, one of the other exceptions we found was from Westminster Business School, who said, we business school communities have to take responsibility for producing the kind of leaders we've had in the world. It's all performance, money, competence, but not ethics. Where have ethics gone? So that's a major issue that we're trying to make a small contribution in. So I've gone off on one already.
No. It's your space. As I said, I'm just here just to prompt you with certain areas. So you've listed 11 qualities. I'm sure everyone's purchasing a copy and going through these 11 qualities. Are you saying that these are the only sort of 11 exhaustive qualities of the Prophet ﷺ, or were there more qualities and you've narrowed it down to 11? And the second part to that question is, which quality would you see as the number one quality from these 11 qualities? Or is there a central quality from which other qualities emanate from, or a framework from which these other 11 qualities are categorized or understood?
I think the framework, as Sheikh Abdurrahman Hilbawi very kindly mentioned, I learned so much from him, in all honesty. In 2012, it was Islamic Institute for Development Research which asked me to run a course, which Tanim mentioned, happily came as president of LSE, and then went back and taught it back to them, to the committee, mashallah. So
The slide. Yeah.
there were more than 50 qualities that were
Tanim,
compiled.
I know you're focusing on Nabeel, but we also need focus on the data.
Yeah, so that's Birkbeck College. That's Manchester Business School. MBS comes up sometimes, but that's not MBS.
That's the course.
That's Manchester Business School. So we came up with more than 50. And I essentially
50 qualities.
More than 50 qualities.
From the Seerah.
Consulting multiple sources, including some of the books that you've mentioned, Ibn Kathir and beyond. And there I started to whittle down. And one of the things when you talk about qualities which are also values is also to consider, what is the deeper value? Someone may come up with a superficial value, but what does it lead to? And it often leads to some of the high-level objectives of Islam in itself. Hence, Sheikh Jasir Awda mentioned the maqasid, so things around human dignity, freedom, justice, human rights. These often it boils down to these. When you say, it's about I don't know, it's about being nice to someone. Well, why are you being nice to them? It's about something you're passionate about. Well, why are you passionate about that? What is the passion? And when you keep asking why, then you get to the higher values and qualities. And I think the 11 are what I've whittled down. So some of them got merged. Some of them got filtered out. Some of them through extensive looking at Seerah, example, the evidence was just there for this compared to that. So in that way, I've come up with a framework which is just my own exertion, and it's not definitive, it's not ijma, and other people can give other perspectives as well.
And that framework is the Al-Qawi and Al-Amin framework.
Now within the 11, they fall within a broad spectrum, which is Al-Qawi wal-Amin, competent and trustworthy, which we know is...
So you're saying that you have, from the 11 qualities, you have competency and integrity, trustworthiness, the notion of Al-Amin.
Yeah.
And these are overarching qualities under which the other remaining 9 qualities also fall under.
They can fall under as well.
And that's explained in your...
Indeed. You'll find it here.
Chapter.
So intentionally, we haven't put out the qualities. We want you to read, look at it. But part of, I think, what's unique that was mentioned by Sheikh Hassan in the book, and by the way, I invited him to be a full editor on this with his extensive experience in writing. This is my first full book. I've written articles and things like that. I invited him because, just to benefit from his skill and ability to write and articulate. In certain areas, he said, I assume too much knowledge. In other areas, he said, you haven't emphatically presented it enough. So that was very, very useful.
Yeah, it was funny. When I was editing the book, there were places where Nabeel had just put in, okay, to develop yourself, there's salah, there's dhikr, there's Quran. I told Nabeel, take out the Quran, take out dhikr. He said, we're writing a book on leadership in Islam, and you're telling me to take out Quran and dhikr and salah? I said, yes, unless you show me the link between these devotional acts and leadership, then why are you just putting in anything, from the sources?
So I definitely benefited from that input, but I do want you to look at the book and the structure, because what I tried to do, as I said, there is a lot of research. Within the 20 years or so of compiling this book and thinking about leadership, the first 10 years was very research orientated, including the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development, the CIPD, which is the standard body for HR and leadership. And the following 10 years was work done in a global scale, teaching, training, and espousing these ideas and trying to mentor and develop people who have those qualities. And then we put in here a case study looking at an individual and a brand and an organization which embodies or reflects that particular leadership quality as well. And then you have the how, tips section, a few quick tips. I didn't make it too heavy going. It's something you can quickly read, get some quick advice on, quick reflection. And what was really good is I felt as though with this book launch, I was going to hand over the book of someone else, because my ideas have also evolved, because from 2014 to 2018 that I've been working on this, because the prior 4 years I was working on the Neglected Source of Management Principles general book, and then I went more specific into leadership in the last 4 years. So in that period, it was a lot of
the ideas are still evolving. I mean, this is a work in progress, and the ideas are still
Absolutely.
evolving.
And I think that's why it was great that when you read the final chapter, I'm like, the final chapter has to reflect who I am now.
Right.
how I've evolved now. Through this ibtila, this test that Allah has given me, I felt that otherwise I would be submitting someone else's book.
Yeah, so if you look, when you read through the book, you'll see that Nabeel has written this book in different times and different stages of his life. Primarily in i'tikaf with Sheikh Fahim here, as we heard. And it's also no coincidence that we're actually launching your book at a time where you would have otherwise been in i'tikaf telling me that you're working on another edition of your book or another draft of your book. So no more excuses anymore, right? The book is out. What was quite interesting as well was some of the terminologies that you used, or the characteristics or qualities you used, at the very last moment you changed them. So I recall one of the qualities, out of the 11 qualities, one of the qualities in Arabic is a sabr. Now we had a deep discussion as to what does sabr correlate to in English. Is it patience? Is it resilience? What exactly is it? Is there a difference between patience and resilience? And in the end, Nabeel decided, no, I'm doing away with patience and I'm going to go with resilience. And he has his arguments for this. You can read it in your book. So what you see, this book is actually a journey, your journey through leadership and through ideas. And the epilogue is what Nabeel wrote fully from scratch at his time when he was in bed being treated with nurses around him. He was writing an epilogue for the book because the conclusion that he initially had, he disagreed with his own conclusions. These conclusions were 2-3 years ago, but he's disagreed with his own conclusions, right? Yeah, am I correct in saying this?
I think I felt that the conclusion I wrote a couple of years ago in i'tikaf was missing something. It was missing something. So it was actually called What is the Next Frontier of Leadership? And I attempted to say one or two things. I wasn't happy with it. Whereas here I said, crisis, the next frontier of leadership development. And I felt that you have to experience a personal crisis. Leadership is like a tea bag. You don't know how good it is until it's in hot water. If you think you have a good leader in your workplace and times are good, you don't know. But when times get tough, then you will discover who they are. And when you face your own crisis, then you will discover who you are. Some of you may or may not be familiar with Johari's window, which is a self-awareness tool. There's some good articles you can find on, in fact, from Roffey Park Institute, where we have Adrian Locke, a good friend here as well, which says self-awareness is not enough. Because if you think you know your self-awareness, but you don't do anything with it in an active way, particularly through experiential learning. So intellectual learning is one form of learning, but experiential learning is another form. And in the appendices chapters, there's a section on how do you develop yourself. Intellectual, experiential, and spiritual. So there's 3 dimensions we've added within that to build yourself. So I think that's what it was, that I introduced the answer that I was looking for. And I think Sheikh Hassan liked that that chapter so much, he turned it into an epilogue because he felt it brought a different dimension to what I had written before. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You have, look, out of the 11 qualities, I think one of the most interesting qualities that you discuss is this concept of spiritual intelligence, or SQ. And here you say, on page 210, as such, spiritual intelligence is faith-neutral, yet faith-friendly. Please elaborate.
That's an interesting one. That's something me and Andy have been teaching for about 5 years now in the Executive Leadership Program. Spiritual intelligence is not spirituality. And this is the first point that we need to understand. So show of hands, how many of you have heard of emotional intelligence? Yeah, so actually about half of you. We know what IQ is, right? IQ, intelligence quotient. Spiritual intelligence, EI is spiritual quotient. SI, SQ, spiritual quotient, spiritual intelligence. It's the same thing. That's why SQ was mentioned. In the 90s, no one would put their hand up when SQ was mentioned. Now it's pretty mainstream. FTSE 100 companies are using it, doing training programs, and so on. Murabi is one of maybe less than 10 firms in the world that teaches and trains and coaches on spiritual intelligence. We're in the 90s now. And in the next 10 years, this is going to be quite big, but we're ahead of that curve. Now, there are a couple of things here that perhaps I'll just very briefly mention. And again, I think this is maybe the one quality out of the 11 which you need to read it properly, because it does take some, getting around, getting your head around. But in a nutshell, there aren't too many definitions out there either. We have introduced the definition essentially saying that spiritual intelligence is your ability to direct yourself and inspire others, that's the leadership bit, towards a purpose. Ideally a shared purpose, but it doesn't have to be. If you're coaching someone else, it's their purpose. If you're in a common organization, it's a shared purpose. So it's the ability for you to dig deep and find out what are your values and how can you leverage those values to create meaningfulness in your life and in other people's lives. That's the leadership bit. And make a difference, right? Because you've got people working in defense coming up with advanced ways to kill people, and they're very, very good at it, but they're not making a good difference. So there's key elements that I've integrated into it. Then comes the conditions of true spiritual intelligence, things like it has to be integrity and non-manipulative, because emotional intelligence can be manipulative. You know, there was a lot of emotional intelligence and neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, in Alistair Campbell's speeches that he wrote for Tony Blair. Knowing how to kind of manipulate people using EQ is an issue. And they haven't sufficiently put that down as something you have to guard against. So in my chapter on spiritual intelligence, I clarify these sections as well. But I add a little bit of something which Andy often mentions, which is in top workplaces, throwing money and benefits and what have you, they still can't motivate people to a particular level. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how do you get to self-actualization? It's all at the middle. How do you get to purpose and fulfillment? This is not new stuff. Maslow talks about this. And Andy would often say to the many faith-based organizations that he's already trained, you're sitting on a treasure chest as Muslims, sitting on a treasure chest, and you're not leveraging it. And you're not leveraging the power of your faith to give yourself a greater sense of meaning and purpose in your life. And when you do that and integrate it in that way, you can transform your communities and the world. And that's really some of what we have been exploring as well. But in Johari's window, perhaps I'll come back to that, it really goes into you understanding yourself really better. If you know yourself better, then you can apply yourself better. Imagine what's the best car in the world? Car guys, car junkies, what's the best car in the world? Bugatti, that keeps coming up. Bentley, Bugatti. Now, if in the Bugatti you've just figured out the air conditioning, how much potential have you discovered of that car? And that's what self-awareness is like. You have no idea how much you're capable of unless you apply yourself, unless you try something new, unless you go out there, step up and exert your talent and shine. So in that sense, you do look up Johari's window. I might come back to it. So that, it's a really good way to think about your self-awareness in a concerted fashion through experiential learning. And you need to face a little bit of a crisis, I think. That's what you need. You need to face a personal crisis. I'm sorry. Johari's window. Johari.
It's all in the book, Christian. And the more copies you buy, the deeper your understanding would become.
If I could give everyone a copy, but that's up to the publishers.
When I was reviewing the book, there was also an area, or if you can just care to explain, and we're nearing the end, so for those of you who are conscious that iftar time are coming, and also Nabeel wants to give you the chance to also ask him questions yourselves. You mentioned there's something in decision-making to do with public defensibility, or the concept of public defensibility. And in commenting on that, you introduced a term called divine defensibility. So what is public defensibility in decision-making, and why did you need to coin a term called divine defensibility?
So at the heart of the 11 qualities, you also asked me what's the most important. And in the chapter on integrity, I do kind of make a little bit of an argument that integrity and ethical leadership is at the heart. Now, within there, in the case studies, I offer a couple of real case studies that I've advised on. Scenarios like you're a humanitarian organization, you come to a particular area, the militia runs the town, they're blocking and they want bribery. And if you pay them bribery, you get to go to that village and help people. If you don't, because your policy is anti-bribery, people might die. What do you do? So the moral dilemma. So lots of my work in the last, particularly 10 years, but even beyond that, has been really how do leaders navigate moral dilemmas? Because as leaders, you often are just faced with a set of bad choices. And that's just the way it is. So within that, how do you navigate that? How do you make quality decisions? And I've seen leaders after leaders saying, you know what, we just made a bad decision. Maybe in a Muslim organization, we'll sit here, look at a moral dilemma, plug out one hadith and then make a decision. There's no thorough strategic analysis, there's no pestel, there's no real insight where the difference between might be 45 and 55. So in that particular sort of moral dilemma process, there is a very, very good sort of checklist provided by this professor of business ethics in Cornell University, Professor Dana Radcliffe, not Daniel Radcliffe. So Dana Radcliffe puts a nice checklist where he says a range of things which are contained here. They include looking at consult your organizational values, look at when one value conflicts with another value, and decide as an organization what is your defining value. So that's a good process. So for example, I'm appraising a staff member. My value says compassion and excellence. Out of compassion, I want to give them a second chance because they haven't performed well. But excellence means I have to hold up to high standards. What do I do? So that's a common issue that I've been advising for many, many years. So in that situation, he gives a lot of advice, and then he gets to public defensibility. If this is your defining value, what are you able to defend to your stakeholders? Run with that as a board. So it's a nice checklist that board members, but what I did was add something else, which is divine defensibility, because sometimes, even if you make a decision that you think your stakeholders will agree, you have to ask the question, is Allah happy with it? Is Allah happy with it? Look at the way, whenever, this is a bit controversial, whenever internationally a party we like wins the election, all their weaknesses, failures, or even things you might think is not quite halal, you forgive and forget, because they won the election. But no one's asking, is Allah happy with that victory? What's the metaphysical dimension? And hence, in that sense, I just explore that area. It may be both public, stakeholder, and divine are aligned. It may be. But pause a thought for how Allah feels about what you just did. And that particular dimension,
and that's what you term as divine defensibility.
That's divine defensibility.
Right,
yeah.
right. I mean, before I hand over now to our
Q&A.
brothers, sisters, elders, guests, just one last question on the issue of leadership, Nabeel. Are leaders born leaders? Are they developed as leaders? We have, I have, Hussein, Sumayya, Zain. Are they leaders, Nabeel? Can I send them to you? Can you figure out whether they're leaders?
I'm going to give
is there a paradigm?
There is a paradigm. People have, this is the leaders born and made. Now, before, I actually give credit to my dear friend Steve Reed for helping us explore that question a few years ago. I don't know if you remember, you brought a study for us. Maybe you don't remember you did this. You helped us answer this question. But before I go there, Junaid, do you remember that, in 2014 or 15? Show of hands, how many of you think that leaders are generally born? And then I'll do show of hands, how many are you're made, you're nurtured into leadership. So actually, you've either got it or don't have it. This is an age-old debate and question. So show of hands, how many of you think that, you're born leaders? This gets a split generally. I'll ask you to shout out, don't say 50-50, but show of hands.
None of them believe
majority, more than 50% of, your chance of being a
but Nabeel,
good leader.
Nobody's put their hand up here.
Okay, yeah, go for it. Leaders are made.
Made as in, they're born leaders.
Okay, let's start with born.
Okay.
Leaders are born. Leaders are born. Yeah, a lot of people think so. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we've got maybe 15 hands.
Can we ask them if they consider themselves to be leaders?
We can?
No? Okay.
We'll come to that question. Okay, shout out a percentage. You said leaders are generally born. Shout out a percentage. Just quickly shout out. 70? Okay,
70.
yeah. Any others? 60? 100%. Thank you, Ross. So let's do the other way around. Leaders are made. Leaders can be nurtured. You can become a leader, an effective leader. Yeah, so that's a little bit more, which is encouraging. And shout out percentage for me, would you? 70, 80? 70, 80? 90%? I think 100 stretching it a bit, Mamoon. 100 stretching it a little bit. So, this is something...
Was that Mamoon?
That was Mamoon.
I'm
that
not
was
surprised.
Mamoon, mashallah. Wonderful to see. See, I have to say, although I've lived in London longer, I am still Mancunian. I haven't forgotten Manchester. Alhamdulillah. Although you're in Spain now.
And you have many here from Manchester, by the way.
Unbelievable, yeah. It's a real honor. I don't know if you remember, you shared a study with us. Yeah, you shared a study with us. And that study, perhaps for another day, Steve, I'll invite you to perhaps 80-20. Which way? 80% is nurture. God has given us the ability to develop ourselves. God has endowed us with the ability to develop. And there are unbelievable examples of people that I know who I would never imagine they would step up to become a leader, and they're unbelievable. So this is something incredible that you shouldn't, we sign ourselves out of leadership opportunity. We don't step up where the world needs us to step up. And hence we need to, I remember consulting a particular, Sheikh Abdul Rahman Hilbay, I remember a couple of Quranic and Hadith verses you shared. There is a verse in the Quran in terms of we raise others above in rank so that they may seek work from the Hadith that Allah has bestowed some with qualities, and that can be interpreted as nature and nurture. So both means are possible. So our ability to really transform ourselves, if the reason why طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم. So why are we encouraged to develop ourselves if there's no point?